What would you do if the only thing left to your name was a dead man's folly the whole county laughed at? Settle in, and let the Kenyan dusk settle with you. Wherever you are tonight, whatever window you are watching from, tell us in the comments where in the world you have carried this fire with you, and then walk a little way up a road that has no name. Because in the summer of 1887, in the Red Rock country of the Arizona Territory, a woman of 27 walked that road alone with $11 to her name and everything else already buried. Her name was Clara Reese, and she had been a wife for 4 years and a widow for 11 weeks. Her husband, Daniel, had been a plain and gentle man who broke horses for other men's brands, and one gray morning in April, a green colt had gone over backward in a wash and taken Daniel with it, and that had been the whole of it. There had been no fortune to leave. There had been the opposite of a fortune. There had been a note against a string of borrowed mares, and a note against the winter's feed, and a note against the little house they rented at the edge of Coldwater. And when the men who held those notes had come and been polite and then not polite, Clara had signed away the mares and the feed and the house, and what remained, when the last of them had ridden off, was $11 folded in a tin, and the particular kind of pity a small town keeps for a young woman it has decided to feel sorry for. She had felt that pity in the Mercantile, where the talk stopped when she came in. She had felt it in church, where 3 families in a row asked her, gently, whether she had thought about going back east to her people, as though a woman with no people and no fare was simply being stubborn. Pity, Clara had learned that spring, is a thing a town hands you instead of a chance. So when the county posted its notice of tax sale on the wall outside the land office, Clara Reese read every line of it. Because a chance, even a bad one, is still a chance. Most of the lots on that notice were nothing. A dry quarter section no plow had ever cut, a burned-out saloon, grazing land so poor the goats had given up on it. And at the very bottom of the list, in the clerk's cramped hand, was the lot the whole of Coldwater County had been telling stories about for 30 years. The fool sky dome on the rim, $11 in back taxes, no minimum bid, but the taxes owed, no description at all, as though the clerk could not be troubled to dignify it with words. Clara knew the thing they meant. Everyone in that country knew it, as you know a scar on a face you pass every day. 40 miles north of Coldwater, up where the wagon roads gave out and turned to nothing, on a high shoulder of red rock above a canyon that fell away into blue distance, stood a great white dome. You could see it from the far ridges on a clear day. A pale round shape sitting up against the sky where no building had any business being, and out of the top of it, tilted through a split in the dome like a spar through a broken hull, jutted a long dark tube of brass and iron longer than a freight wagon, aimed forever at the empty air. A telescope. The finest telescope, folks said, west of the Mississippi River, built by a dying man for a town that never came. Clara went to the land office with her $11 and laid it on the counter, and the clerk, a soft, heavy man named Otis Pomeroy, looked at the money and then at her and let out a laugh through his nose. "You want the Sky Dome," he said. It was not a question. He said it as a man says the punchline of a joke he has told many times. "I want the lot at the bottom of your list," Clara said. "The taxes are $11. I have $11. Mrs. Reese." Pomeroy leaned his weight on the counter and gave her the smile men give women they are about to explain the world to. That is 40 miles of no road to a pile of cracked plaster a rich fool built in a place with no people. There is not a soul within a day's ride of it. There is no water you can count on, no house you would want to sleep in, and no way on God's earth to make $1 off it. Old Abe poured a silver fortune into a temple for the stars, and the stars, near as anyone can tell, never once thanked him for it. You will be buying a headstone, a big white one. Is there another bid? Clara asked. Pomeroy spread his hands over the empty ledger. There has never been another bid. There will never be another bid. That is rather my point. Then write my name, said Clara Reese. He wrote it. He shook his head the whole time he wrote it, and when he pushed the deed across the counter he said, not unkindly, the thing that the whole county had said for 30 years. The thing that had become the name of the place. A palace for stars, he said, in a place with no people. You mark me, Mrs. Cornelius Sardee died the biggest fool this territory ever grew, and now you have gone and bought his monument. There was an old freighter warming himself by the office stove, a white-whiskered man who had hauled ore through that country since before the war. And as Clara folded her deed into her tin, he spoke up without turning around, in the flat voice old men use for things they have decided are true. My grandmother had a saying about that dome, he said. She used to look at it up on the rim and shake her head and say it anyway. A lamp lit where nobody lives will still find somebody. He spat into the ashes. Never did make sense to me. But she said it every time. Clara did not know it yet, standing there with a laughed at deed in the tin, but before her story was done, she would learn exactly how the grandest glass in the territory came to stand on a road that led nowhere. She would learn why its brass still caught the sun after 30 years when no name at all appeared on the county's books to tend it, and why a warm lamp burned in its window most nights above a canyon where no living soul was supposed to be. And she would learn what waited behind the one thing in that whole ruined place that no weather had touched, a squat iron door built deep into the masonry of the dome, a door the entire territory swore had been stripped bare by creditors before Clara Reese was even born. Hold on to that door. Everything turns on that door. It took Clara 2 days to reach her purchase. She traded a day's work at the mercantile for the loan of a stutty mule and a canvas of provisions, and she went north out of Coldwater on the freight road until the freight road quit, and then she followed a track that was more memory than road. Up through juniper and blackbrush and long red benches of stone, until on the second afternoon she came out onto the high shoulder of the rim and the dome stood up in front of her against the sky. It was bigger than she had understood from the ridges. Up close it was enormous, a drum of dressed pale stone as wide as a church and taller, and on top of it the great ribbed dome. Cracked now and streaked, but still round, still holding its shape against the weather like something that refused to be told it had failed. And through the split in its shutter, canted hard to one side, where a footing had given way under it, the long brass tube of the telescope reached out over the canyon, tilted and wrong, like a great eye knocked half out of its socket, still trying to see. The sky that afternoon was the deep blue that country gives you after the heat breaks, cobalt, with tall white clouds standing far off over the canyon, and the low sun came in hard and clean across the rim and struck the red rock until it burned orange, and struck the pale dome until it glowed, and struck the long brass tube. And the brass answered. Clara stopped the mule and stood in her stirrups, because the tube up there, that long dark shape she had seen tilted and dead from 40 miles off, was not dark at all up close. Where the sun fell on it, it threw the light back bright and hard, a clean, warm gleam running the whole length of it, sparks jumping off its bands and its rings. That was not the dull skin of 30 years of weather. That was the gleam of a thing that had been rubbed by a hand, and rubbed lately and rubbed with love. She told herself it was a trick of the sun. She was tired and grieving, and the low light does strange things on metal. She rode the last quarter-mile up to the dome and got down stiff and sore, and told herself again, out loud this time, that she had bought a ruin, because saying it out loud felt like protecting herself from hoping. And a ruin, at first, was exactly what daylight showed her. The near side of the dome was split top to bottom, a black crack you could put your arm into, and where the crack ran down into the stone drum, the footing had heaved and settled, so the whole great shutter track above had seized and buckled, which was why the tube hung crooked and could not be moved. Sand had drifted knee deep against the base of the walls and up the outside stair. Fine red sand that hissed off the steps when the wind moved it. Half the copper had been stripped from the roof ribs. A raven had built in a broken louver. It was, from the outside, precisely the dead thing Ottis Pomeroy had sold her, and Clara stood in the sand below the stair and felt the last of her foolish hope go flat. And she began, right there, to make the practical and bitter arithmetic of the poor. Brass, she thought. There is a great deal of brass in that tube, and brass sells by the pound. Iron in the fittings. Dressed stone a builder might haul off if any builder could reach this place. She would strip what she could carry, sell it in cold water, and be no poorer than she had been, and a little wiser, and done with fools and their monuments forever. She climbed the seized outer stair, kicking sand off each tread, and put her shoulder to the door at the top, expecting it to be locked or fallen or gone. It swung open easily. The hinges did not so much as complain. That was the first thing that stopped her. A door abandoned 30 years does not swing sweet. A door swings sweet because a hand has kept oil on its hinges. Inside, the observing room ran up into the shadowed height of the dome, round and high, and the light came down through the split shutter in a hard blue bar and lay across the floor. And in that bar of light Clara Reese stood very still, because what she was looking at made no sense at all. And her mind went about the slow work of refusing it. The room was 2 rooms. That was the only way she could think of it afterward. There was the ruined room, and laid right over the top of it, in the same walls, there was a kept room, and the line between them ran straight down the middle of everything. Along the walls, deep dust. Dust on the sills, dust on the old star charts curling off the plaster, dust drifted in the corners like the sand outside, the gray felt of years no broom had touched. But the floor around the base of the great telescope was swept. Not clean, exactly, but swept. A wide, clear ring of it, the dust pushed back to the edges. And in the center of that ring, the brass mount of the telescope rose up gleaming, every wheel and rod of it rubbed bright, and the long tube climbing away into the gloom overhead shone like a thing brought out for Sunday. The eyepiece end, down low where a man would stand to it, had been polished until Clara could see the blue bar of daylight bent small and perfect in the metal. Around it, everything decayed. It, the machine itself, cared for like a living thing. And there was a smell in the room, under the dust and the hot stone, a smell that had no business in an abandoned place. Lamp oil. Fresh lamp oil, sweet and sharp, the smell of a wick trimmed that week. Clara turned slowly, and there against the far wall was a plain plank table, and on the table, set out as though someone had only just stepped away from it, was a tin plate and a knife and half a loaf of bread with the cut face still pale and soft, and when Clara crossed to it and laid 2 fingers against the crust, the bread was warm. She snatched her hand back as though the table had bitten her. "Hello?" Her own voice went up into the dome and came back thin. "Is someone here?" Nothing answered but the wind in the split shutter. Now, understand what Clara Reese understood in that moment, standing in a dead man's ruined palace with a warm loaf under her hand. She understood that everything Coldwater County had told her about this place for 30 years was, in some part she could not yet measure, a lie. The tube was not dead. The lamp was not out. The dome was not empty. Somebody living had been standing where she was standing, perhaps within the hour, somebody who kept the great glass bright and burned oil that could not be bought within 40 miles, and cut fresh bread where no living soul was meant to be. And she understood, with a small, cold thrill that was not quite fear and not quite hope, that she had not bought a headstone at all. She had bought a secret, and the secret was still warm. That, right there, is the question I would leave sitting with you a moment. Would you have run? A great many sensible people would have run, back down the stair to the mule and the long road home, and told the story in Coldwater the rest of their lives. Clara Reese did not run. She set the bread down gently as you set down something that belongs to someone else, and she began to look closer. And it was in looking closer that she found the door. It was set into the thick masonry of the dome's drum, low at the north side, where the stone was heaviest. A squat iron door, no taller than her waist, riveted across in bands, the hinges sunk deep into the wall. This was the door. This was the thing the whole territory swore was a stripped and empty strong room. The Lynn's vault that A's creditors were said to have carried off bare 30 years gone. But it had never been opened. Clara could see that at a glance, and the seeing of it lifted the hair on her arms. Because across the seam of that iron door, holding the hasp shut, was a thick disk of dark red wax, old wax, cracked and dust-gray on its face, but whole, unbroken, never cut. And pressed deep into the wax, clean as the day the die came down, was a seal. Clara went down on her knees in the dust to look at it. She blew the gray film off it with her breath. The seal was a star with 7 points, cut by a careful hand, each point a little different from the last, as a hand-cut thing always is. 7 points. She had never in her life seen a 7-pointed star used as any man's mark, not on a brand, not on a saddle, not on a grave. And that was when her breath stopped, because she had seen it, not on a wall, not in a book. She had seen exactly that star, small and scratched and private, in one place only in all the world. Clara's hand went to the pocket of her skirt, where a thing lived that she had not been able to sell and had not been able to bury. Daniel's watch, a cheap brass pocket watch, dented, the only fine thing her husband had ever owned, and she had carried it every day since April with her thumb worn to the habit of its cover. She drew it out now with hands that did not want to work, and she turned it over, and inside the back cover, scratched into the soft brass with the point of a knife by some hand years ago, small enough that she had taken it 100 times for a scuff, was a star with 7 points. Clara Reese knelt in the dust between a dead man's sealed vault and her dead husband's watch, and she looked from the one star to the other, And for a long moment the wind in the shutter was the only sound in the world. She did not understand it. She would not understand it for many days. But she knew, as you know a thing in your body before your mind will say it, that the road she had ridden up here on had not been a road to a ruin at all. It had been a road home to something, and the something had been waiting. That is where the door in the dome will hang for a while now, sealed with a stranger's star that her husband carried scratched over his heart. Because before it opens, you have to know how it came to be sealed at all, and to know that you have to meet the man who sealed it, who was, at that very moment, not 30 feet away. Clara heard him before she saw him, a slow scrape on the inner stair, and then a voice, an old man's voice, dry and gentle and unafraid, coming down out of the dark of the dome. "You came up the outer stair," the voice said. "The students always use the outer stair. I have told them, and told them to use the inner, in the wind, but they never listen, the young ones. Come up then. The sky will not be clear forever, and there is Saturn tonight if we are patient." Clara stood, her heart going hard. "Who is there?" she called. "Show yourself. I have bought this place. I have the deed." There was a silence. And then the scrape came again, and down the curving inner stair into the bar of blue light came an old, old man. So thin the light seemed to go halfway through him. In a coat gone green with age, feeling his way along the wall with one flat hand. His hair was white and long. His face, when he turned it toward her voice, seemed like the canyon itself, and his eyes, Clara saw, with a small ache, were the pale, clouded blue of a man who has almost no sight left, eyes that pointed at her but did not find her, that searched the light for a shape they could not quite make. "Bought it," the old man said, and something moved across his ruined face, a confusion, and then a smile of such sudden and terrible hope that Clara's throat closed. "You have bought it. Then the town has come, after all this time. The railroad came, and the town has come, and you are the first of them up the hill." He took a shaking step toward her voice, both hands out now. "Tell me true, girl, are there people on the road behind you? Is the valley full? Have they come at last to look at the stars?" And Clara Reese, who had climbed the hill to strip the brass off a ruin, stood in the falling light and could not, for the life of her, say no to him. "Who are you?" She said instead, "Softly, Halloran," said the old man, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "I am the night assistant. I keep the glass." He tilted his head, listening to the shape of her silence. "You did not know there was a keeper," he said, and the hope went out of his face slowly as a lamp gutters. "No, of course, nobody knows. They think I died. It is easier if they think I died." He lowered his hands. "You are not the town. There is no town," Clara said. She said it as gently as she had ever said anything. "I am sorry. There is no town, Mr. Halloran. There is only me. I bought the lot for the back taxes, $11. Everyone in Coldwater thinks this place is empty." The old man stood very still in the blue light, and Clara watched 30 years land on him all at once, and then, remarkably, he nodded, as if he had only asked to be sure, as if some part of him had always known the answer. $11, he said. And then, softly, with a crooked smile, he would have liked that. He always said the price of a thing and the worth of a thing was strangers who had never once been introduced. He turned his clouded eyes up toward the great tube gleaming in the dark above them. "Well, you have bought the finest grass west of the Mississippi River for $11, Mrs. Whatever else is true. you have got the better of that bargain. Now, since you are here and the sky is clearing, would you do an old blind man a kindness and help him find Saturn? My hands know the wheels. But I have not, in truth, been able to see the rings myself for some years now, and I do miss them. They found Saturn that night, the two of them, the old blind man turning the bright wheels he had rubbed smooth by touch, aiming the long tube by the memory in his hands. And here Clara saw what had puzzled her since the daylight hours, for the far end of that great tube, up against the split shutter, stood empty and dark, its socket bare, the true eye of the instrument simply gone from it. But strapped along the mount was a little finder glass, no longer than her forearm, with a small lens of its own that Halloran had ground years ago, and to that he set her. Clara put her eye to the small glass and gasped aloud when the little pale ball swam into the dark with its ring around it clean and impossible and real. She did not yet understand why so grand an instrument should have to watch the sky through so poor and small an eye. And in the lamplight afterward, with the great dome open to the stars above them and the canyon a well of blue night below, Halloran began to tell her. And over the days that followed he told her all of it, one piece at a time, as an old man gives you a story. In the lamplight and over the days. But before any of it, there was a morning Clara nearly did not stay for. She woke that first dawn stiff on a bedroll on the observing-room floor, with the gray light coming down through the split shutter, and for a long while she lay, looking up at the great tube hanging crooked above her, and made, one more time, the hard arithmetic of the poor. She had a mule to return. She had $11 gone and nothing to show a creditor. And she had, whatever the lamplight had made of it, a blind old man to feed now, on a rim 40 miles from a sack of flour in a dome that would not keep the rain off through one hard winter. The sensible thing, the thing any careful woman would do, was to ride down the mountain. Keep her mouth shut about the glass, and let the secret die when the old man did. She had actually risen and rolled her bedroll and gone to the door before the ledger stopped her. It lay open on the plank table where Halloran had left it, and the low light fell across the last page, and Clara, meaning only to close it, read the line the old man had written the evening before, in his slow, blind hand that ran uphill across the page. Sky clear, it said, glass kept. Below that, the third line, the same as 30 years of third lines above it, someone will come. From the dark of the inner stair, not yet down, the old man's voice came gentle and certain, as though he had been awake and listening to her decide. "You are at the door," he said. "It was not an accusation. I heard you roll your bed. It is all right, girl. You may go. I have said good-bye to a great many mornings up here. I will keep the glass a while yet." Clara stood with her hand on the door, and the gray wind coming in, and the ledger open under her eyes, and she thought of Daniel, and she did not yet know why she thought of him, only that the shape of the old man waiting alone in the dark for a settlement that would never come was a shape she could not turn her back on and go on being a person she liked. "Come down, Mr. Halloran," she heard herself say. "The sky is clearing. Show me the wheels again. I am not going anywhere." And that is how she came to stay for the story, and this at last is the story. Halloran had come into that country as a young man with nothing, the same as she had. He had been quick with his hands and slow with his letters, a fixer of things. And he had drifted up out of the silver camps looking for work, and he had found Cornelius Ade. Ade was a silver man, He had come west young and gone down into the ground and come up rich, richer than any one man has a right to be, and somewhere down in the dark he had picked up the one hunger that money cannot feed, which is the hunger to be looked at kindly after you are gone. Eddie had no wife living and no child. He had a fortune and a bad heart and a habit on clear nights of lying on his back in the desert and staring up until the sky frightened him. He told me once, Halloran said, that a rich man who dies rich has simply failed to spend his life in time. He meant to spend his. He meant to spend all of it, and on the one thing he had come to love. Which was that? And the old man lifted his chin at the sky. What Eddie wanted was a gift. Not a church, he said, for a church tells you what to think. Not a school, for a school takes only the young. He wanted to build a place where anyone at all, a child, a cowhand, a washerwoman, a drunk, could climb a stair on a clear night and put their eye to the finest glass money could buy, and see the rings of Saturn with their own eye, and pay not 1 cent for the privilege. A free window on the sky. He was going to build it for the town he was certain was coming. Because the railroad surveyors had run their lines up this way, and everyone with money knew, everyone, that the road would come north through this canyon country and a city would rise on this rim. So Eddie spent. He ordered the great glass from back east, the objective lens, the eye of the whole instrument, ground and polished across the sea and freighted around the Horn and hauled the last 40 miles by ox team over a road he built with his own money for the purpose. He raised the dome. He mounted the tube. And he hired one clumsy, quick-handed young man to be his night assistant, and that young man. Over the years of grinding smaller lenses and learning the sky became the nearest thing to a son the old Silver King ever had. And then, Halloran said, the railroad chose the other grade, 50 miles south. A better water grade, the engineer said, an easier climb, and the iron went south through Coldwater, and the town rose there, in the low country. And the canyon rim with its great white dome stood exactly 40 miles from the nearest human soul and might as well have stood on the moon. No town came. No children climbed the stair. Eddie had built the finest window on the sky in all the West, and set it down in a place from which no one would ever look. It broke him, said Halloran, not the money. He never once cared for the money. It was the emptiness. Every clear night that glass could have shown 1,000 people the ringed planet, and every clear night it showed them to no one, and he could not bear it. He took to calling himself the names the valley called him. The fool, the madman with his star temple on the rim. His heart was going by then, and the men he owed, for he had spent past the end of his fortune building the thing, the men he owed began to circle, because a rich man dying with a priceless glass in the desert is a carcass misses, and they could smell it. Here Halloran stopped, and for a while he only turned Daniel's watch over in his old fingers, for Clara had shown him the watch and the star, and he had gone very quiet and asked to hold it, and she had let him. "You want to know about the door," he said at last. "Yes," said Clara. "I want to leave you with the same question that hung in that dome, because it is the one Clara turned over half the night. If you had climbed a hill everyone laughed at and found behind a sealed iron door a thing the whole county swore was gone, a thing worth more than the town that mocked the man who made it, would you open it to prove a dead dreamer right, or would you leave it sealed and safe and let the lie stand? Tell us honestly in the comments what you would have done, because what Halloran told her next made the answer a great deal harder than it sounds. The creditors were coming, Halloran said. We had word they were 3 days off, with a writ to seize the glass, the one thing in the whole works worth carrying away. Abe was dying by then. He could not sit up, and he called me to his bed, and he said, Halloran, they will take the eye. They will pry the eye out of the head and sell it back east, and this dome will be a blind skull on a hill forever. And I said, then let us hide it. And he smiled, as a man smiles who has been waiting for someone else to say the thing he did not dare hope for. So they did it in the dark, the two of them, a dying man giving orders from a chair and a young man doing the work by lamplight. They took down the great objective lens, the eye, worth a fortune, packed it in its felt cradle in its wooden case, and into the thick masonry of the drum, where a mason under A's own hand had years before built a small, dry, strong room for the storing of charts, they laid the lens, and with it 30 years of the assistant star logs, and one thing more, a paper, sealed, that Ady signed with the last strength in his hand. And then they walled the iron door, and Ady pressed his own seal into the wax across it, his private mark, a star of 7 points, and he said the thing Halloran would carry the rest of his life. He said, let them believe it stripped. Let the whole territory believe the creditors got the glass, and there is nothing here but a dead man's ruin. A ruin no one wants is the safest thing on earth. And a light, he said, kindled for the empty dark will find a soul in the end. He believed that. He believed it to the last. The creditors came. They found an empty mounting where the great lens had been, and a grieving assistant who swore, weeping, that the old man's partners had carried the eye off east in the night ahead of the writ, and they cursed and tore the place half apart looking, and found nothing, because the one door that mattered was only a sealed strong room the old chart said was empty. And they had no reason on earth to break a wall for dust. They took the copper. They took the instruments they could carry. They filed the loss and rode away, and they told Coldwater the glass was gone east, and Coldwater has believed it for 30 years. Ady died that same week. They buried him without a stone. The fool of the county and the valley forgot him. And Halloran stayed. Where would I have gone? The old man asked, and it was not truly a question. I had promised him. Keep the glass, he said. Someone will come. And so I kept the glass. I kept it bright with my 2 hands. I trimmed the lamp so that if ever, on any night, a soul should look up from the low country and see a light on the rim, they would know the sky was open and someone was home. He lifted his clouded eyes toward her. I ground my own small lenses to save my sight, and I lost it anyway, staring at a sky I built a window for. 30 years, Mrs., I wrote the sky in the log every dusk, whether it was clear or no, and every dusk I wrote the same last line, the same words he taught me, waiting to be able to write them true. He took her hand, and he laid it on a great flat ledger on the plank table, and Clara opened it, and there it was, 30 years of dusks in 2 hands, the old man's, and, in the earliest pages, another, firmer, older still, Ady's own, 1 line to a night, sky clear or sky closed, glass kept, and then, every single night, the 3rd line. 30 years of it running down the pages like a heartbeat that would not quit. Someone will come. Clara Reese closed the ledger, and she looked at the old keeper who had kept a light burning for a town site that never rose, and she made up her mind about the door. They opened it together 3 mornings later in the bright of a hard blue afternoon, with the sun coming clean through the cracked shutter and lying gold across the dust. It should be said that Clara had ridden down to Coldwater once in those 3 days to bring back oil and flour and, though she told no one why, to sit an hour in the county recorder's office reading old papers with her heart in her throat. She had told not a living soul what she had found. She had let the county go on pitying the widow who had thrown $11 away on her ruin. And she had ridden back up the nameless track with her jaw set, because some things you keep close until they are safe. Now she knelt at the iron door with a thin blade, and Halloran knelt beside her with his hand on her shoulder, seeing it all through her, and she set the edge of the blade to the disk of old red wax and the 7-pointed star, and she looked up at him. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It is his seal. It is 30 years. He set it there so it would be broken," Halloran said, "on the day someone came. You came. Cut it, girl," she cut it. The wax broke with a small dry sound, and the 2 halves of the star fell away into the dust, and Clara worked the old hasp free and set her hands to the iron door, and it resisted her. 30 years grown into the wall, and then it came, groaning, out of the masonry, and a breath of cool, dry air came out of the dark behind it, air that had been shut away since before she was born. Clara reached the lamp into the strong room, and the light went in, and she stopped breathing. There, on a shelf of dressed stone, in a wooden case with its lid laid back, cradled in, felt gone soft with age, lay the great glass. The eye, the objective lens of the finest telescope in the whole West. A disk of clear crown glass as wide across as a wagon wheel, ground and figured by a master's hand, and when Clara's lamp swung near it, the whole disk woke and threw the flame back at her 100 times over. Deep in gold and living, perfect, unscratched, unsold. Exactly where 2 men had laid it in the dark 30 years before, so that no one would ever carry it away. Beside it stood the stacked logs, bundled in oilcloth, the record of 30 years of skies. And laid flat on the top of the case, weighted with a stone, was a paper folded in 3 and sealed again with the 7-pointed star, a paper with words written across the outside in a firm old hand, to be read under the open dome on the night the people come. Clara did not open it, not then. She sat back on her heels in the dust, with the great glass throwing the lamplight up gold across her face and across the ruined dome, and beside her the old blind man was weeping without a sound, his hand pressed flat to the cool stone of the shelf, and he said, over and over, so quiet she almost missed it, "It is still here. It is still here. I kept it. It has been here all along." And that, Clara thought, watching the priceless eye of a dead man's gift blaze in her poor lamp, ought to have been the end of it. She had found the treasure the county swore was gone. She had proved a mocked man right. But a thing worth a fortune does not stay quiet in the ground, and Clara had made one small mistake. She had sat that hour in the county recorder's office reading old papers, and a soft, heavy clerk named Otis Pomeroy had watched her do it and wondered why a broke widow would care so much about a dead fool's deed, and Otis Pomeroy had a cousin in the territorial capital who did work for an estate, and word in that country travels as sand does, quietly and everywhere. 9 days after Clara broke the seal, dust came up the nameless road from the south. Not one rider, and Clara, standing at the head of the outer stair with her hand shading her eyes against the hard blue afternoon, watched them climb the rim and knew, before she could make out a single face, that the world had found her out. They were a lawyer, a land agent, a young man in a good coat, and a hired man with a rifle across his saddle. The young man in the good coat rode up to the foot of the stair and looked up at Clara and did not get down. "You would be the widow," he said. "Reese, my name is Prentice. Julian Prentice. My family holds what remains of the Cornelius Oddie estate, and I have ridden a very long way, missus, on a very poor road, to take possession of my property." "You have no property here," said Clara. "I bought this lot at the county's own tax sale. $11, and the deed recorded. It is mine." Prentice smiled as Pomeroy had smiled, and Clara was coming to understand that it was the same smile everywhere, the smile of men who have decided the world is theirs and you are a delay. "You bought a lot," he said. "You bought sand and cracked stone and a folly, and you are welcome to it. What you did not buy, what no tax sale could convey, because it was never the county's to sell, is the chattel, the instrument. The great lands my great-uncle's creditors were cheated of 30 years ago, which I have very good reason now to believe was never carried east at all, but hidden here on this rim by a servant and a dying man in fraud of their lawful debts. He swung down at last, and the hired man with the rifle swung down with him. I have a writ, missus, out of the Chancery Court, to seize and sell the lens of the Oddie Observatory in satisfaction of the estate's standing claims, and to condemn this unimproved and abandoned land for its dressed stone. You have dug up a fortune that belongs, every ounce of it, to me. Now stand aside from that stair. And here is where a lesser story would have given you a gunfight, and I will tell you plainly it did not come to that. Because Clara Reese had spent an hour in a recorder's office for a reason, and because a dying man 30 years before had signed one last paper with the last of his strength and told his assistant to keep it safe behind an iron door. "You have ridden a long way, Mr. Prentice," Clara said, and she did not stand aside. "So I will let you say the whole of it before I answer. You are done? Then hear me. You may have your writ. I have a deed of gift." Prentice stopped with one boot on the stair. 30 years ago," Clara said, and her voice carried out over the rim in the hard, clean afternoon light. "Before ever your great-uncle owed the first dollar he could not pay, when the fortune was still whole and the debts not yet made, Cornelius Oddie signed and sealed a deed of gift, granting this dome, this glass, and this ground forever in trust to the people of this county as a free public observatory to be kept open to any soul who climbs the stair. It is dated. It is witnessed. It was made before the debts, Mr. Prentice, which means the glass was never his to owe against, and never the creditor's to seize, and is not now yours to sell. It does not belong to the estate. It does not belong to me. It belongs, and has belonged for 30 years, to every washerwoman and cowhand and child in Coldwater County. And there is not a court in this territory that will pry a public trust out of the hands of the public to satisfy a dead man's private debt. You have no such paper, said Prentice, but his voice had changed. I have the original, said Clara, sealed with his own hand. And more than that, she reached back, and from the case beside the door, she lifted the great lens itself, 2 hands under it, staggering with the weight of it, and she turned its edge to the light so the whole rim could see, and there, cut into the bevel of the glass by the maker back east at Adie's own order, ran a line of engraved letters. It is written on the eye itself, Clara said. Read it, if your eyes are good. The gift of Cornelius' aid to the people, that they might look up without paying. He had it cut into the glass, Mr. Prentice, 30 years ago, so that no man like you could ever stand on a hill and call it his own. There is a particular silence that falls on a man who has ridden 40 miles to take a thing and discovers the thing was given away before he was born. Prentice stood in it. The lawyer behind him had already taken off his hat and was reading the engraved bevel with a sinking face, because a lawyer knows a losing paper when he sees one, and a gift deed predating the debts. Recorded and witnessed and cut into the very chattel was a wall no chancery writ was going to climb. They did not settle it on the rim, of course. The law is slower than that. But it was settled, and it was settled as Clara had meant it to be, in the open, before witnesses, without a shot. Word went down to Coldwater and up to the Capitol, and in the fall a United States Marshal named Boone rode up the long rim road with the county recorder and the territorial judge's clerk, and Clara Reese laid the sealed deed out before the marshal in the observing room, and Halloran, the night assistant everyone had buried 30 years before, put his shaking hand on the great ledger and swore to its truth. And the marshal read the deed and read the engraving on the glass and folded up Julian Prentice's writ and handed it back to him. "There is nothing here to seize, sir," Marshal Boone said, not unkindly. "You cannot sell what a man gave to the public before he owed you a cent. The trust stands. The glass stays. Ride home." Prentice rode home. He was undone, but he was not, I want you to notice, destroyed, and no one raised a hand to him, and that is the way of it in these stories, and the better way. He had come to take a fortune, and he left with nothing but the long road and the knowledge that a dead fool and a poor widow had beaten him with a piece of paper. That was enough. That was more than enough. And then, at last, on a clear, cold night at the turning of the year, they read the letter. They did it as A.D. had asked, beneath the open dome, on the night the people came. For the people came. This is the part I have been keeping for you. When the county learned the truth that the fool's glass had never been sold, that a sightless old keeper had held it burning 30 years, that the priceless eye now belonged, by a dead man's deed, to every last soul in Coldwater County to look through free, the people who had laughed came up the nameless road to see for themselves. They came the whole 40 miles, in wagons and on foot and horseback, the mercantile families and the church families, the drunks and the children, and old Otis Pomeroy red-faced at the back. Up the road A.D. had built and no one had used, up onto the rim under the great white dome. Clara and Halloran had set the great lens back into the head of the telescope. The old man guiding her hands by touch-through, work his eyes could no longer do, seating the eye back into the socket it had waited 30 years to fill. And when the first clear dark came down over the canyon, Clara Reese stood at the foot of the stair and let them up, one at a time, free, exactly as a dying man had dreamed, to put an eye to the finest glass in the west and see the rings of Saturn hang in the dark. Grown men wept at that glass, children shrieked, and had to be lifted down so the next could climb up. Pomeroy looked through it a long time and came away and could not meet Clara's eye, and only said, quietly, a palace for stars. But he did not say it the old way. He said it the way you say a thing you are ashamed you ever laughed at. And when they had all looked, Clara brought out the folded paper with the broken star, and under the open dome. With the whole county gathered and the true sky burning overhead, she read Cornelius A.D.'s last words aloud into the cold, clear air. "I built this light for a town that never came," she read, and her voice did not shake. "I am told I am a fool for it, and perhaps I am. But a glass is only worth the eyes that use it, and a gift withheld is only property. So I give it away. Give it to whoever climbs the stair. The poor before the rich, the child before the councilman, and no man pays. A light built for no one, Clara Reed, still finds someone. It found you. Look up and think kindly, now and then, of an old fool who could not take his silver with him and would not have if he could. Clara folded the letter. There is one more thing, and it is the thing that had waited for her under a broken watch cover since April, and Halloran gave it to her that same night, when the county had gone down the mountain with the stars still in their eyes. You asked me once, the old man said, about the star. 7 points. You showed me a watch with it scratched inside, and I went quiet on you, and I have owed you the why ever since. He turned his clouded eyes toward her in the lamplight. That star was A.D.'s private mark, but he did not use it on his letters or his deeds. He used it on one thing only. He kept a book, a subscriber's book, for the free observatory fund, and every soul who ever gave to it, $1, a dime, a week's wages, he marked their name with a 7-pointed star and told them the star meant they were a patron of the sky, an owner of the glass, no matter how poor. There are not 30 names in that book. The town never came, so the giving never came. Halloran reached into his old coat and drew out a small worn book and laid it in her hands. There is one name in it, Mrs., that I think you will want to read. A young cowhand climbed the stair on one of the very few clear nights a stranger ever found his way up here, years ago now. He looked at Saturn a long while, and he came down, and he took every coin in his pocket, a week's wages he was carrying home, and he put it in the fund, all of it, and he would not give his own name back to me proper. He only laughed and said his wife would skin him and to write him down as a fool for stars. But I wrote his name. Clara opened the book with hands she could not keep still and ran her finger down the short list of the sky's few patrons, past the 7-pointed stars, and found, near the bottom, in Halloran's careful hand, a name. Daniel Reese. Her Daniel. Years before he ever knew her, a boy with a week's wages had climbed this same stair and looked through this same glass and given every cent he had to a dead man's dream and been marked a patron of the sky, and gone home and scratched a star inside his watch so he would not forget the one grand foolish thing he had ever done, and never told a living soul, not even his wife. The observatory was already partly hers. It had been hers in a way since long before she owned a thing. Clara Reese sat in the lamplight of the open dome with her husband's name under her finger and the great glass turning slow overhead, and she would not weep, though she could have. She only laid the watch beside the book, the 2 stars together, and understood at last the whole shape of the road that had led a broke and pitied widow up a nameless track to a ruin no one wanted. It had never been a road to a ruin. Halloran had been right, and the old freighter's grandmother had been right, and a dying Silver King had seen true, and only the whole rest of the county had been wrong. They offered to buy the glass. Later, of course they did. When the story spread, men came from the capital and even from back east with money in hand, real money, a fortune, more than Clara Reese would see in 10 lifetimes, to buy the great lens off the rim and carry it to a proper city where proper people could pay to look through it. And Clara, who had climbed that hill with $11 and had planned to sell it all for scrap, stood atop the stair and told every one of them no, the glass was not for sale. The glass had never been for sale. The glass belonged to every child in Coldwater County who might yet climb the stair, and it was going to stay exactly where a fool had put it, aimed at the sky, free. She stayed. That is perhaps the strangest part and the truest. She could have sold her deed and gone back east to a soft life on a rich man's guilt. Instead, Clara Reese moved her few things up onto the rim into the kept room in the ruined dome, and she learned the wheels of the great telescope from a blind old man's patient hands. And she learned the sky, and she became, without ever quite deciding to, the second keeper of a light meant for no town at all. The last I will show you is a small thing, and it happened on an ordinary clear dusk, months on, when the county had learned the road, and a wagon or two came up most fine nights now to look at the sky for free. The work of the day was done. The great glass was clean. And Clara Reese stood at the plank table with the old ledger open, the ledger holding 30 years of dusks in two dead men's hands, and she dipped the pen, and under the very last of Halloran's lines she wrote the day's entry in her own new hand. Sky clear, she wrote. Glass kept. And then, for the first time in 30 years, she wrote the third line true. The line A.D. had taught Halloran, and Halloran had written 1,000 nights against the empty dark. The line that had waited 3 decades to be written in the past tense. Someone came. Beside her, the old man could not see the page, but he knew the shape of her stillness, and he knew what she had written, and he smiled up into the vault of the open dome where the stars were coming out over the canyon one by one. There is a smaller secret in this place still, and I will not tell it to you, because Clara never asked it, and I think she was right not to. There is one star in that whole sky, a faint one, low in the south in summer, that Cornelius Addy named quietly for a wife he had loved and lost when they were both very young, before the silver, before any of it. Halloran knows which star. He has never said, and Clara has never asked, and some kept things are meant to stay kept between the keeper and the dark. But this much is not a secret, and it is the whole of what I brought you up this nameless track to see. Cornelius Addy died the biggest fool in the county, and they buried him without a stone. He had spent a silver fortune building the finest window onto the night sky the West had ever seen, and set it down where no one lived at all, and for that they laughed at him for 30 years. And they were wrong, every one of them, because the treasure up on that rim was never the great glass, worth a fortune though it was. The treasure was never the lens a man could sell. The treasure was the sky he gave away, free forever, to whoever was poor enough and small enough and hopeful enough to climb the stair and look up. A light built for no one still finds someone. It found a sightless old man who kept a promise 30 years. It found a broke young widow with $11 and a dead man's watch. It found a whole county that had to be shamed into looking up. And tonight, wherever you are watching from, whatever window you are sitting behind, it has found you too. Thank you for climbing the stair with us tonight, and for sitting a while in the lamplight of a story. If it warmed something in you, stay a moment longer in the comments and tell us the name of one dreamer in your own life that the world called a fool and time proved right. We will be here, keeping the glass, keeping the light. Someone always comes.